Good evening, everyone. How are we? Hope you're all well. I am Tricia Grant. I am coming to you live on the Whole Health Project. This is part 3 of a 3-part series on emotional intelligence. So hopefully you've caught the other 2, but if not, that's okay. I'm here to discuss this evening agility and our agility levels, and also communication, and a couple of tips on how we can be better and more effective communicators. Warm welcome to everyone. Thursday night. Hope you're doing okay wherever you are in the world and getting a lot of benefit from the Whole Health Project Facebook group. It's absolutely fantastic. I am loving it. I've been able to lean into some meditations and do a bit of yoga, and it's been so worthwhile. So I'm super grateful to be a part of the community and also to be able to learn so many different wonderful things. I think this is such a unique time for us, being able to access all of these amazing people, with just a virtual click of a button, really. And that said, I encourage all of us to take at least 20 minutes a day to better ourselves, whether it be through mental, spiritual, or educational enlightenment, and or just bettering ourselves as humans. So all of that said, let's go ahead and kick it off. I am going to go ahead and share my screen with you just to go ahead and introduce myself, and do what we've done the last 2 weeks, which is go over the outline of what is emotional intelligence, talk a little bit about the different competencies that fall under EQ. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into an agility exercise, which is going to require a pen and paper or a phone if you have it. I'm a pen and paper kind of person myself. And then what we will do from there is go ahead and talk a little bit about communication. So all of this ties into what we discussed last week, which is really, 2 weeks ago, which was self-awareness. And then last week we talked about behavioral self-control and our triggers. So all this stuff sort of works together to ultimately, if you are to watch all three parts, it just comes together to be a really good foundation for you to show up better and communicate better with people in your life. So let's go ahead and share the screen. Oh, sorry, hold on. I never really am very good at this. Let me just see. Okay. All righty, hopefully it is working. Let me go ahead and present this from the beginning. All right, so again, my name is Tricia Grant. I am a Institute of Social and Emotional Intelligence certified emotional intelligence trainer and facilitator. I am also the co-founder of EQ Culture with my business partner, Stephanie Pinto. She's amazing. She specializes in coaching adults and children and in creating emotionally intelligent families, where I tend to lean toward leadership development and growing confidence for people, and communication and confidence. I have a certificate from the Institute of Social and Emotional Intelligence. I run a really kick-ass group on Facebook with about 1,300 members called Emotional Intelligence for Leaders in Business. So if you're a coach, I highly encourage that you come on I just realized that my headphones weren't in. Hopefully you can hear me. If not, that's cool. So anyway, I was saying I run the Emotional Intelligence for Leaders in Business Facebook group. And I also have 2 businesses. Well, excuse me, I have one business called Garrison Force, where we do business development. And then I work as a consultant, business consultant in hospitality for Draper Startup House. So yep, that's me in a nutshell. And today we are going to start again with what is emotional intelligence. So I love EQ. The reason I love it so much is because I found it really spoke to my sort of analytical side. It's a little bit more pinpointed for me. And people who get into it, we do these EQ tests that really show specific growth areas. So you're able to really hone in on certain areas that you can develop. And then once you start to really grow those areas, everything else starts to flourish. And you can also see what your real big strengths are, and same deal, you focus on those and everything else just comes up. So I love EQ. I absolutely fell in love with it when I started getting into it really deep about 2 years ago. And yeah, it's just been really helpful for me. I've seen a lot of growth in myself and, of course, the people I work with. And so, what is it? By definition, it is the ability to be aware of your own emotions and the emotions of others in the moment, and then to use that information to guide your decisions, actions, and behaviors. So, this is the definition of EQ from the ISEI, Institute of Social Emotional Intelligence. And I always point out there's 3 words in a row that are super important and really, really define what EQ is. And those 3 words are in the moment. And the reason that's so important is because we all know what we should be doing and what we should be saying, but we don't oftentimes do it in the moment. And so it's really important that that we recognize that that's what sets us apart as far as who we are and how we respond to people as opposed to react. So that is what emotional intelligence is. It's sort of the ability to be aware of all that, and also you know uh, it falls into about 26 different competencies, which we're going to touch on in just a couple minutes. All right, so these are the competencies here. We have got 4 quadrants. First one, self-awareness. This is the baseline for everything in EQ, and it's really a huge baseline for us in life, right? So self-awareness, it's huge. It's who we are. It's how we view ourselves, right? And really how we view ourselves is how we view the world, really, and how what I believe to be true is what is true based off what I believe of myself. So this is a really, really big baseline. So we have to know who we are, and we have to be willing to accept who we are, no matter what that looks like. And does that mean maybe growing? Sure. And I also think it could mean, a lot of growth. Absolutely. So that's self-awareness. The second quadrant here is self-management. So some really great things under here that we discussed last week. Behavioral self-control was one of them. It's our stress management. Today we're going to be touching on our personal agility. And that means like how adaptable are we to change? And things like that. The way that we manage ourselves and how the way we feel when we're under stress, how intentional we are with our decisions, all these wonderful good things about how we control ourselves and respond to certain things. And then we have the other 2 quadrants, of course, other awareness, which is the awareness of others. We have empathy. That's a huge one. Oftentimes, as I've mentioned before, EQ, usually people say, oh, emotional intelligence is empathy. Well, no, that's just one of the 26 competencies of EQ. Also, situational awareness, reading the room, making sure you have an idea of like what's going on, what the energy is, right? Sometimes we can feel it right when we walk into a place. And then the last quadrant, which I always believe a lot of our leadership competencies and our leadership behavioral traits fall in here. So that's communication, that's our inspirational leadership, building bonds, teamwork and collaboration, coaching, mentoring, and building trust. So that's how we break it up. It's fantastic. As I mentioned, we do these beautiful quizzes where you're able to see what areas you're high in and what areas you're low in, what you might need to grow on, which is fantastic if you're doing it with your partner as well, because if you do it together, you can often see like where certain people's pain points and growth areas are, and then where your strengths are, and then use them together to really have harmony within your relationship. Awesome. Cool. So tonight we are going to talk a bit about adaptability. Okay, so adaptability and agility. And to highlight what adaptability and agility is, we are going to take a little personal agility test, which I think we're going to find quite fun. So if you're paying attention, if you're listening in and you have a pen and paper or a phone, then definitely pull it on out and we will go ahead and do this test. So I've got this great little quote here. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. Okay, so those who can best manage change. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. And Darwin said that actually in response to adaptability. Um, and why I think this is so important to discuss right now is because we are all going through so much, even if we're not sure of it or we aren't really fully aware of it. Things are moving extremely fast. All the coronavirus and COVID stuff aside, it's just a faster way of life. And if we want to prepare ourselves and our children for the future, this is a huge, huge important competency that we should be developing in them. And there's lots of ways that we can do that, and also ways that we can develop it within ourselves. So, personal agility, by definition, is the ability to anticipate and respond rapidly to changing conditions, to acknowledging that we live in an era of global permanent change. Agility means taking a proactive approach to change, anticipating challenges, anticipating opportunities, and a willingness to rethink past assumptions, and readily, willingly, and rapidly adapt to change. So there's lots of great things in there. It's agility and adaptability to me is very important. I think I'm quite personally, I have a very high level of resilience. I move around a lot, live in different countries. Um, and, I love lots of things about change, but I also believe now as I grow older, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is that though this is so important, there's a certain way that we need to embrace change, which is just with a little bit more thought and decision making around it. So that's why I think agility is super important, but communication, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, is equally as important because they support one another. But again, so it's really all about not remaining stagnant. Okay, so agile leadership and agile mentality, and it's a growth mindset. All these words we've heard before is all about being able to see a situation and not just shut it down. Right? Things aren't just black and white. They're not just 2 + 2 = 4. Well, sometimes it's 2 + 2 = cube. And why is that? And so it's about being able to remain open-minded and have perspective, and also be willing to be flexible. I think on the other hand, as I mentioned, that you get a little bit slower as you grow older. As we move forward with technology, remaining agile and open to different ways of communication, and technology is also quite big and really important. Like, I mean, even like look at TikTok. I don't know who's on TikTok. I've done one video, but it's just another thing for us to have to learn. And so it's something that can be really kind of leave us stuck and not willing to grow with it. So let's talk about people who actually have this competency, people who show up with higher personal agility. They tend to manage changing situations and transitions with ease. They examine situations from many different perspectives. I love that one. I think perspective is so important. They're looking at it from different points of view. They're saying, okay, well, that's her perspective and that's his perspective. And why might he feel that way? And why might she think that way? They anticipate the need for change before it's imposed. This is a really good one. So this is something that you're ready for it even before it actually happens. Strategically and proactively embrace change. So again, that was sort of something I was talking about, where yes, we can make changes quickly, but if you're strategic about it and you're proactive about it, then it's going to turn into a better result if you do need to make that change. Willing to rethink their assumptions. This is a good one. It leans into sort of open mindset, fairly agile in your leadership style. If you're leading a team or if you're coaching, that you're not in that closed mind of like, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's more about really opening up and being able to accept that you might not have had it right the first time. I think that's a really good one. You're adaptable, flexible, and respond rapidly in the face of change. This is good. Okay. So I think a lot of my agility came personally from working in Michelin restaurants and having to think on my feet when someone's yelling in your face. And it can be really, really challenging and defeating. But if you don't stay focused and if you're not willing to make changes really quickly, then you can just, it doesn't serve anybody. And I think a lot of people who are in, military or even emergency room doctors and nurses and people that have to really think on the fly, you tend to build these muscles up, right? So these people tend to have higher personal agility because they're used to thinking on their feet in really high intense situations. Yeah, so learning from experience, personal agility. So people that put themselves out there, they make mistakes, they fall on their face. And so therefore they're willing to learn from their experiences and then use that information to move on as they get further in life. And adjusting your approach to meet the demands of ever-changing situations. So that's a really good one as well. And again, it's just remaining in that growth mindset, that agile leadership. Adjust your approach to meet the demands of different situations. This could also show up as like, if you're in a really difficult situation with people that you're not gelling with, like emotional humans that with emotions, just adjusting the way you're showing up. So this could actually really benefit you if you're in, let's say, sales or something. So where you're able to say, okay, these people are not vibing with what I'm trying to sell. How can I speak their language and see it from their perspective? So people who lack this competency, they tend to deal with change. They lack perspective to deal with changes. They deny, ignore, or resist change as it occurs around them. They're not willing to explore or be open to the new possibilities that change may bring, and they blame others for changing circumstances. They maintain an inflexible attitude in the face of change. Who knows this person? I know this person. I think I can sometimes be this person. I can sometimes be like, God, no, like, oh man, not again. It's tough. Agility can be a real challenge for people. People get stuck in their ways. They get, complacent. They don't ever feel like they need to learn anymore. So it's something that a lot of people can find they do need to develop. So some tips, okay? Separate fact from fiction. Differentiate what you actually want to happen from what is actually happening. Okay, so separating your facts from fiction. Differentiate what you want to happen, what your outcome in your head is, to what is actually happening. Okay, because what happens if you don't differentiate between what's in your brain and what you think is going to happen to what is actually happening is you get stuck on that thought, and you're not able to move forward from that thought. Now, if you can't take that moment to move forward, if you're not building that agility muscle, it's going to be really, really tough for you to get out of that negative headspace and get out of that block. Does that make sense? I think it does. And we're all guilty of it. We've all been in our head, or like you envision something panning out the way that you want it to, and it doesn't. But the reality is it rarely ever does. So we need to really let go of that expectation and move on and be flexible and be like bamboo and go with the flow. All right. Another developmental tip would be to seek out people who can provide you with support during transition. This is a good one, really good one. We all have our people. I've just personally gone through a large transition in the last month. It's been a personal decision of mine, and I have to turn to the 3 people within my network that I really lean on in these times for advice and, to help me. I'm quite resilient, as I mentioned, naturally, but that said, we still all go through stuff and we all have to deal with change, and it can be a bit of a challenge. So you make sure you have that support system around you, whether it's a coach or a friend or your mom or dad or anybody that you consider close, and someone who you trust. And another developmental tip would be try out new ideas. Go for it. Just try it. Put yourself out there. I've been dancing a lot lately since we've been in lockdown. It's been awesome. Trying new things is what's the worst that can happen, is the type of attitude that we could all go with. And, trying them out instead of just thinking these ideas, like go for it. Just go ahead and do it. And again, you can actually lean on that person, those people that you trust to really help you if you are nervous to jump off the ledge and like say, hey, whatever, like I want to go travel, and then actually taking the step and doing it and feeling good about it. It's okay. Usually 9 out of 10 times everything's going to be fine. If not 9.9 out of 10 times everything's going to be fine. Awesome. Okay, cool. So now I want to share with you guys that are listening a bit of a quiz that I put together for one of the group coaching sessions that I had. Let me go ahead and see if we can get this downloaded really quickly into that. So this is going to be just a quick test on whether or not you're agile and if you have a high level of agility and where your agility level sits. And this is great because you're able to use this information to then build your agility based off of some of the developmental tips that I've shared with you. So personal agility, it's becoming increasingly more important as a self-management skill. It means being comfortable with change and ambiguity, adapting well to new challenges, shifting our gears, being able to make decisions and take action when all the information is not yet readily available, or if we don't have the total picture. I think that's really good way of describing what agility is. Like, you don't need all the answers before you take a step is basically how you can measure your agility. First, on this exercise, read each statement and determine how frequently you perform the action or demonstrate the behaviors that make for a person with strong personal agility. On a scale of 1 to 5, always to never, rate your actions and your behavior. Then gather your data, find your total and see where it sits on the scoreboard. Lastly, oh, that's something for our group. But nonetheless, what we're going to do, oh, goodness, someone's put zeros in it. Anyway, doesn't matter. We've got this, people. So if you can see this, and I don't know if you can, I'm going to go ahead and read them out. So 1 is always, and 5 is never. I'm going to just take my jumper off as well. It's so hot. I've got them right under the heater. All right, cool. So this is where we're measuring our agility. 1 is always, 5 is never. So 2 is almost always, 3 is occasionally, 4 is almost never, and 5 is never. Okay, so number 1, I find it easy to operate out of my comfort zone. I'm going to take this with you guys, actually. So I find it easy to operate out of my comfort zone. That's number 1. So just write down 1 through 5 and then just go straight down the line. All right, number 2, I am comfortable with change. Number 3, it's okay when things are up in the air. Number 4, I readily embrace new ideas and concepts. Number 5, I quickly make decisions and solve problems even when there's not enough information. Ooh, that could be to my detriment, actually. I shift gears quickly when things change. Number 7, I don't go around cursing change or let change put me in a bad mood. Number 8, I like to learn new skills and new ways of doing things. Number 9, I can take action without having the complete picture. Number 10, I readily embrace shifting priorities. Number 11, I am comfortable if I have to do things differently than they've always been done. Number 12, people would view me as someone who's curious and interested in a new way of doing things. People would view me as someone who is curious and interested in a new way of doing things. Number 13, I am comfortable working with my spouse or partner who may have different views than me. That's an interesting question. Number 14, I anticipate change and respond readily. I anticipate change and I respond readily. Number 15, I can juggle multiple demands with ease and a smile. Number 16, I am comfortable with risk and uncertainty. That's a good one for right now, especially with coronavirus and everything that's been happening. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Number 17, I tend to be an early adopter of technology as well as ideas and new ways of doing things. I tend to be an early adopter of technology and ideas and new ways of doing things. Number 18, I adjust quickly to the need for change, even if the facts available to me are limited. Number 18, I adjust quickly to the need for change, even if the facts are limited. Number 19, I happily rearrange my schedule to make sure new priorities and deadlines are met. I happily rearrange my schedule to make sure new priorities and deadlines are met. And number 20, I am comfortable with chaos and complexity. All right, so that's 20 questions altogether. So just add them up real quick. All right, cool. Awesome, guys. All right. So if you need to pause it, go for it. So what you're doing is you're just adding it up. Remember, 1 is always, 5 is never. If you're watching, I don't think there's very many people watching, but nonetheless, if you're watching this on the replay and you want a copy of this, just reach out to me and I will send it on over. Cool. My personal score is 23. And so that means that my personal agility is moderately high. So you're going to want to go ahead and get your personal agility score. And then from that, go back and decide whether or not you will need to work on your agility. I've given some tips probably about 5 minutes ago before this test started. And then also you can certainly look it up online as well if you're keen on growing your agility. And there's so many great YouTube videos. There's so much good stuff out there. You know, we're so lucky. Or if you feel like your agility is too high, which is absolutely a thing, it's not always served me having really high agility. Sometimes I make decisions too quickly without all the information, and then I have to go back and, you know, I've made a mistake or a really strong learning lesson. But that said, you know, sometimes you really want to sort of be a little bit level. But that said, agility is something that we all need to consider as we continue to move forward, where things are just getting more and more rapidly made in technology, and the world is getting smaller and faster, and it's hugely important for our children. So you can see it a lot with kids when they feel very worried or anxious before situations actually happen. So some tools to help them would be to talk it out, to take risks with them, to put them in situations where they are a little bit uncomfortable, but they know that you're there to support them. And there's plenty of other things that we could always talk about around agility. So that is agility. And yeah, again, it's a really great subject matter for now, in particular with everything that's going on with coronavirus. A lot of businesses have had to really pivot and think of different ways of doing things or earning money. And, you know, sometimes when it's really in our face like that, we have to think really quickly on our feet, even if we don't want to, or we don't feel comfortable doing it. And yeah, so that's that with that one. Awesome. So that's adaptability and agility. And reminder, Darwin says it's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. So love it. Awesome. So that's agile, being agile. All right, next, communication. Let's talk about how we communicate. I love communication. I think it's huge. It's so important in everybody's relationships, whether you're, you know, in a personal relationship or a professional relationship. In particular, now that we're online and there's so much going on the internet right now, there's a lot of, you know, just noise, everything. It's about how we communicate and communicate effectively. Funny enough, I was actually just talking about this with a friend earlier on the phone, and how how I said I'm down to like the 2-sentence email, just because it's a lot. Like it's so much stuff and so many emails these days, and written communications and pre-recorded things. How can we really communicate a little bit more effectively? But today we're going to talk a little bit about communicating with each other, and how important it is for us, again, as emotional intelligent beings, to grow our relationships. So the definition from the Institute of Social Emotional Intelligence for communication is listening deeply and openly, and sending clear, credible messages. Again, it's listening deeply and openly, and then sending clear and credible messages. All right, so notice how communication's first point is that listening is the way, really the beginning way of being a great communicator is really to listen, which I absolutely love. And I think it took me a while to figure that out personally. I'm quite a talker, but it is so important to really listen, and then also send clear and credible and clear, precise messages about what it is that you want, and or what you're feeling from the particular moment, and making sure that your message isn't getting skewed or misconstrued. So people who have great communication skills, they're effective in giving and taking. So that means they're happy to listen, happy to contribute to the conversation. They register emotional cues, and they're in tune to their messages, which is I love that, actually. I think that's really good. And it's so much more than just speaking and listening. There's verbal, there's nonverbal communications. We can get really deep into all of that. Not today, but we could. And I love it. There's actually 4 different styles of communication, but it's about that. It's about giving and taking and really understanding emotional cues. They deal with difficult issues straightforwardly. This is something I think I personally have always had as a strength, and it's sometimes been my detriment, because I would say things without actually really thinking about the outcome. Over time, obviously, and with EQ training, you tend to soften around that. But I don't know if anybody can relate to that, where you're a little bit outspoken and you're really comfortable with being straightforward about things that upset you. And sometimes I think a really true good communicator is someone that's able to understand who's on the receiving end and how they're going to respond to that kind of abruptness. But nonetheless, you deal with the difficult issues straightforward. You deal with them. You don't necessarily have to speak them out. You're just able to deal with them effectively. You listen well, you seek mutual understanding, and welcome sharing of information fully. So that's communication. If you are a good communicator, then you listen, you seek mutual understanding, and you welcome sharing of information fully. Okay, so who's in a relationship? Raise your hand. How about when you feel like you're sharing things and it's coming off really clear, and then maybe not so clear to the other person? And that is where difficulties and mismatch can happen in our personal relationships, is where we're not really listening to what they're saying because we've heard it over and over and over again. Or they're not really listening to what we're saying because they've heard it over and over and over again. And they're not really welcoming information, and vice versa. So that is a huge pain point for a lot of couples, and communication is actually the number one thing that breaks down any relationship. And that's us as humans. That's how us as emotional beings are able to convey our messages and get our feelings out, is through communicating. So what happens sometimes is people completely shut down, or they over communicate. And so it can be, really quite difficult. So if you can remember to come back to these fundamentals of what makes a good communicator, like listening, really listening, and then seeking a mutual understanding, and then welcoming information, you can really help you with your relationships. Communicate. Hi, Melissa. I love her. Intent, she says. I like it. Tell me more. She said intent VA, but I'm not really sure what VA means. I love it. Okay, so yep, sweet. Speaking effectively in front of large groups. That's a huge
point and a real challenge. As a matter of fact, public speaking can actually be one of the most difficult things for us as humans to overcome as a fear. So you can build that muscle. You can build on being a better communicator. Um, and then this is a really good one: listening to feedback without becoming defensive. Who has been defensive from feedback before? Raise your hand. I think we all have. In particular, when it's coming from our partners, it can be really difficult to take on that feedback, or people that are really close to us. But if you can really take that feedback on without getting yourself in a defensive place, then it's really going to help with your effectiveness of communication. And what can really happen, oh, there she goes. Okay, hold on one second. What can happen is if you can take yourself out of the situation and you can not listen to that person's defensive response, that's only their perspective. So that actually makes you super heightened as a communicator. So if you're able to listen to feedback from someone and not get defensive, then good on you, and like, amazing, well done, that's great, because that's just their perspective of how they're seeing you, right? And then furthermore, if you provide feedback to someone and they get defensive, then you don't need to worry about that, because that's, again, their perception. So it's a tricky one, but I hope that was pretty clear. So, but the idea is that not to get defensive, because that's only their perspective of you. It doesn't mean well, it might mean all that much. It depends on who's providing the feedback and whether or not you hold them in high regard. But regardless, they're saying something for a reason, whether it's because of their internal triggers and paradigms and things that upset them, or if it's because it's an actual trait of yours that shows up. So needless to say, that's one of the major points of having strong communication competency. And people who lack this, I'm just going to quickly read what Melissa wrote here. She just wrote, intent versus impact is such an important point to consider. Sometimes what you intend is not how it's received and impacted onto the receiver. Absolutely, which is, I love that. Okay, so intent versus impact is such an important point to consider. Sometimes what you intend is not how it's always received and impacted onto the receiver. So that is so true, Melissa. Thank you so much for putting that up. Like 100%. So that's, again, that's perspective. So you're saying something that you think is going to be beneficial, and that person might take it a completely different way, but they're only taking it the way that they know to take it based off of their perception of reality and whatever that looks like. And so the more we're aware of this, the more we are aware of this, the stronger we'll be able to respond as opposed to react in a communication setting. I will say one thing, and I love that you bring this up. And if we're talking about like kind of a work environment and feedback in a work environment as well, how important it is to be aware of this, but also be aware of patterns and habits. But there's so many things and tools that we can do nowadays where we're able to actually improve our communication skills, like activities where we can offer each other feedback, etc. But I love that, because it's true. It's the receiver might not pick up what it is that you're putting down, and vice versa. And that is like all the way up to like your mother, your sister, your brother, all the way to the person that you've barely met, So it's interesting what we perceive. And I find it really quite fascinating, because perspective is such a unique thing and we all only have our own. So it's best to really try and understand someone else's as best we can. Cool. And so next, what happens if we lack communication? We fail to listen, we interrupt, we find fault in what others say. We're difficult to connect with, unapproachable, and maybe avoid bringing, you tend to kind of leave them alone and avoid bringing them news. They tend to communicate with ridicule, threats, or emotional outbursts. They fail to ask others for their opinions. They're unwilling to change their opinion, and they may express ideas or opinions in a dogmatic manner, and they're unable to establish rapport with others. Does anyone come to mind that might be lacking this competency? I definitely have some people I know that lack this competency in my life, and it can be really hard to, I'm not really a big fan of the word hard, but it can be a real challenge to communicate with them, especially when they're shutting down or not listening. They're unwilling to change their opinions. Their minds are quite closed. It can be a real challenge, especially if you consider yourself someone who's a little bit more open-minded. But on the other hand, when I am confronted with that personally, I tend to shut down. I don't like it. So I go into my own little sort of hole when I feel like I'm being attacked, where other people might be a little bit more outburst. It depends on who you are as a person, but they're all defense mechanisms, and they're all ways that we are protecting ourselves. So these triggers, these paradigms, these ways that we show up, whether it means lacking communication skills or not, they're there for a reason, because they're there to protect us. And that's always something, it goes back to what Melissa said about how you receive something. If you perceive it when you receive it, and if you receive it with defensiveness, there's a reason for it. It's because something's made you upset in that area before. So what are some ways that we can develop our communication skills? Being positive, approaching people in a positive manner. Okay, so being open and welcome to new ideas, new opinions. It's not all like, hey, I'm happy Sally every day, like not realistic. But if we are communicating with other people, let's open up to their ideas. I literally just did a discussion on empowerment about an hour ago. And one of the questions that I like to say to empower our team is say, okay, how? Or what do you think is going to work in that scenario? That's a great idea. How should we do that? And so basically you're encouraging people, okay, that's awesome. What do you think about that? And like allowing them to open up the floor and communicate and build that rapport and give that back and forth. Build bridges of understanding and cooperation. Seek out common interests and goals. So I did this technique once, which was awesome. And did a group of people at an event that I hosted, and it was a networking thing where we had to build rapport. And so within 3 minutes, everybody had to find a what did I call it? I can't remember what I called it. But it was like a trait that connected, or a similarity that connected you. Like, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It was like that, but we did it with, you had 3 minutes and you had to find a trait or something that you guys shared in common. And the coolest stuff was coming up. I remember these 2 people had both been to like this super small town in Italy. And then it turns out they were staying like right next to each other. Like we found out later on that they were really, really close, like on the map at 2 totally different times in life. And there was 2 people that were from the same hometown, but we were in Bali. It was really cool. Such a cool exercise. So doing those types of things and seeking out common interests and connecting with people is really going to allow you to build that rapport and openly communicate. Ask a lot of open-ended questions, unbiased ones, neutral questions that lead the conversation in a real positive direction. So things that are non-judgmental, open, and then you're really willing and ready to listen to their opinion and their perspective when they respond. Even if it's something you might not agree with, there's ways of communicating around that where you're like, okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Well, that's your view. That's exciting. Maybe they'll ask you what yours is and you can offer yours. But the important thing to remember is that if you want to strengthen your communication, then getting defensive and or offering a really strong opinion in a certain area probably won't help that. Not saying lack integrity and don't have boundaries, nothing like that, but be very thoughtful of how you communicate and when it's appropriate to have those types of moments. Express appreciation often and genuine sincerity. So this is gratitude. So communicating and making sure that people who matter to us really know they matter. And if you're having a listen now, like go ahead, pick the phone up and call that person or send a text and say, hey, look, I do appreciate you. Thank you so much. Like, I love having you in my life. You being in my life is so important to me. And that is a huge tip on just keeping the communication lines open. I just did it with someone that's on a team that I consult on. And I said to him, hey, look, I was wrong. My advice a couple months ago was to maybe have you terminated and not work here. And I was wrong. And you're doing a really good job. And he ended up having a real emotional moment, broke down and said, I've been feeling really lost and I haven't been on a good team in a while. And it was a real good moment for us. And I think had I not said, hey, look, I appreciate you and I made a mistake, then that wouldn't have come to fruition. And it's good when you can break those barriers down and really get vulnerable and openly communicate. And I think that that is going to wrap it for the night. So, agility, hopefully, you had the opportunity to take that little quiz. And if not, I'm happy to send it to you at any time. You can just go ahead and reach out to me on any of my social media things, and I'm happy to send that to you. And just a reminder for those listening, if you do have a team or you're on a member of a team or you have 5 people or 5 to 8 people that you want to get together, we're doing emotional intelligence jolts. They're so much fun. They're about 30 to 50 minutes with you and your team. We do them over Zoom, and we'll do maybe like 1 or 2 competencies like we did tonight. We'll talk a little bit about what EQ is and why it's so important. And then we'll do 1 or 2 competencies with you and a couple of your team members. And it's so much fun. So you can just contact us at connect@eqculture.com or just reach out to me directly. And if you want, you can find me on social media. It's www.triciagrant.com. And our Facebook group, again, is Emotional Intelligence for Leaders in Business. And I'm just at Tricia Grant EQ on Instagram. And that's it. I hope everyone enjoyed this series. If you get the chance, please go back and watch number 1 and number 2. It's a lot of good insight, and it's about 3 hours worth of emotional intelligence worksheets and techniques and things that you can implement into your life every day. And I would love to stay contacted. So if you did watch this and you enjoyed, please send me a message, and I will look forward to hopefully hearing from you soon. All right. All the best to everyone. Peace, love, and well-being. Bye.